Welcome to Revive Hi-Fi Canada, and our latest episode features the Pioneer VSX-430. So why did I do a video to discuss an old stereo receiver like the Pioneer VSX-430? There are quite a few of these receivers I see floating around from the 90s and early 80s, and this was an interest, or 90s and early 2000s. And what I found is that a lot of these receivers were now transitioning from 2-channel into the space of home theater to become AV receivers. And it was during this era where you started having these simulated surround modes, and you had quite a few different stereo receivers from different companies like Sony and Pioneer that we're featuring here, Yamaha, that had 5 channels, that they would have the right, left, and then they would have the center and surround channels. They also had stereo front A and B. And I wanted to talk a little bit about these receivers because I find value in many of these receivers. A lot of people don't look at these types of receivers or amps with high praise because they have the black plastic front, and it's called the BPC, and the black plastic is not viewed favorably. But I like to bring up a redeeming feature of a lot of these receivers, and that they were built in an era where stereo was still predominant, and they then were able to still reproduce a lot. Their priority and their build was not about as much about decoding different codecs for home theater, but they were more or less trying to still maintain that stereo sound quality while moving into having the option of giving you 5 speakers. So because there weren't these different types of streams that were from, for example, from a DVD or a Blu-ray, or nowadays we stream through HDMI, for example. These receivers didn't have a lot of that. They had picture inputs, some of them, and I find value in these receivers because they still had a phono input. And yeah, I do have to say that there is value here because you can find these for low cost. So say you had some new speakers, and I'm using a new pair of speakers here, like the KEF Q150 I have here. One of my favorite speakers for the money, and you wanted to play vinyl, and you wanted to have a system that had a lot of inputs, and with a vinyl input and CD input, and you wanted to not pay so much. Well, a lot of these receivers are floating around that still give you a phono input, give you a pretty decent stereo sound, and have the power still to drive 2-channel audio to your speakers with ease, because their priority was still in the music realm. As we moved more and more into the 2000s, there became a more defined separation between stereo receivers and stereo amps, and more of the AV amps. And those AV amps had more and more sophisticated features, and they became maybe a little bit less about stereo sound. Some are still quite good, and they became more about processing picture, processing sound, different types of signals coming in, and having a lot of automated, very sophisticated features. Whereas these types of receivers that are typically these black plastic fronts still give you those AVRs of today tend not to always come with a phono stage. Some do, but these old ones did, and you're paying a lot less money on the used market for these typically. And I'll give you an example. The Nakamichi AV1 is probably one of the best stereo sounding receivers I've ever heard, if not the best. It has such great, clear, clean, powerful sound to drive most any speaker. And it was one of these types of receivers where it was, the black front, and it had Of course, it was a metalized front from what I remember, but it had a similar setup where it was trying to be a surround receiver, but it was still prioritizing stereo, and it had a phono stage. So say you got yourself some new speakers and you need an amp and you want to drive them with what these are Class AB amps, and you're thinking, well, I want something a bit more powerful, I don't want to pay a lot. And so you had the space for one of these receivers, well, and you're looking for a phono stage. That's why I was that's why I wanted to review this particular receiver, and there are quite a few of these, and talk a little bit about the 2-channel sound. So the Pioneer VSX-430 is rated at 65 watts per channel going into stereo, and that's about right. From when I play it, it seems about right. It tends to be in that range. You've got the total harmonic distortion of 0.09%. It has a speaker load impedance rating from 8 to 16 ohms, and of course the KEF Q150s here are 8 ohms, and it's about 15 pounds in terms of its weight, so it's not too light. It's not too heavy either. I've had many that are 20 plus pounds in these types of receivers. You know, if you're looking for something simple that doesn't break the bank, I would say this receiver and receivers of this ilk are quite an effective solution. So I also had, for example, when I first started this hobby, I had a Yamaha, I think it was RXV 2400, and wow, that thing had incredible features and for theater, and it had incredible sound for stereo, and it had a phono stage. And that was a phenomenal receiver. I mean, that still sells for quite a bit from what I know, and it should. It's just a big hunk of metal that is extremely well built. This is not quite to that level, but you know, it sounds decent. If you're looking for an economical way to drive newer speakers, this is not a bad route to go, because these original AVRs tend not to have as high a value on the used market. Not as much as what I see many of the stereo receivers have. So it has interesting features. It has several different surround modes on it. It has a bass knob, a treble knob, and a balance knob, as you can zoom in a little bit here on just below the volume. And it has many different inputs. I'm on the CD input right now. It's got LD for laser disc, if you remember those. It's got quite a few others. It's got a phono input, and it's got, of course, a headphone jack, and yeah, you know, it's got some different. I just use it here in 2-channel, and it sounds really decent. And I'm gonna be playing a demo here for you. Of course, here on Revive Hi-Fi Canada, we don't really have we don't do these demos, of course, for you to make your decisions based off of them, but we do want to give you an idea of how they behave in a real life situation. So yeah, this is a shorter review. I'd like to say I would definitely explore these types of receivers as an option. I did when I first started. I didn't have a ton of money in this field. I still don't have a ton of money, and so I review and discuss different things, different items that come across our desk here at Revive Hi-Fi Canada, and we do get a lot of older equipment like this. And yeah, you know, this receiver, it's not really anything. You can't really say much bad about it, and definitely for the sound, something from the mid-90s, it's really not a bad receiver at all. And I really like that it has the knobs for the bass and treble, so you get a pretty nice adjustment that way. It's got a super bass button, which was a thing back in the day. It's also got many inputs for you, so you can input many different types of devices. You can have an aux cable and play through your phone or your DAC or whatever you like to do. These have that capability to connect. So, and they don't look terrible. It doesn't look bad at all. It has pretty much everything you need to have a sound system. So if you move more to the early 2000s, where some of the AVRs don't have HDMI capabilities, this is where you find some pretty decent value. They have pretty good DACs built in, digital audio converters. I had a Marantz SR4600 and that had a really nice DAC built in, so I can play my CD player through it, and it sounded fantastic. And you know, it had sounded great for stereo, yet it still could have that 7-channel on that particular receiver. It had the 7-channel capability, and it sounded great for music and movies. So that's when you move closer to the early 2000s, you know, around between 2000 and 2010. Whereas this is from the 90s, so it's really not too bad. They're just moving into the surround area, but that Marantz didn't have a phono stage. This one does, and you know, that allows you to play your vinyl. So thank you for watching, and the sound stage, you know, you'll hear it maybe a little bit, but the sound stage in stereo is really decent, and the imaging is not bad. You know, the clarity is pretty good. Of course, it's not as good as my NAD stereo amp or my Cayenne amp that's sitting underneath it, but if you want a simple setup with a phono stage, it's there. It does the job. So thank you for watching. And see you next time on Revive Hi-Fi Canada. If you like what the items that we're showing on our channel and some of the discussion, please subscribe. It helps us out a lot. Have a great one. Bye.
what's left is right. Chasing stars and holding you. I can't see the end, but we'll see it through.